Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Optmyzr. My name is Mari Breilin, and today I'll walk you through how Optmyzr's rule engine helps advertisers like you move beyond basic automations into smarter, more strategic, more nuanced workflows without losing control. So Google Ads rules are a great way to automate some simple tasks that don't really require a lot of sophistication or layering. Fantastic for quick changes, but they don't always give the flexibility you need for bigger, more advanced workflows. And that's where Rule Engine and Optmyzr come in. Hey, and before we dive in, I do want to give just a quick shout out to our brilliant colleague, our senior customer success lead in our Latin American office, Juan Aristimuño. He actually wrote a blog post about this very topic a few years ago. We'll link it in the description below. What we'll do today is we'll expand on some of those ideas that Juan started in the blog post and see how Rule Engine has evolved over the years to give advertisers like you an edge. We'll take a look at the Optmyzr interface today, and we will also have a quick look at the rules interface today and talk a little bit about what's possible in Rule Engine but might not be possible in the native UI rules. If you haven't used Optmyzr's Rule Engine or Google Ads rules in the past, I just wanted to quickly walk you through how that works. So at the very top level, we have our account. Within that account, we can have different strategies. Now, Google Ads calls these rules. Optmyzr calls these strategies. What are strategies? Strategies are funnels of stacked rules. So we have our account. Then we have our strategy A. In this example, something to help us review negative keyword ideas, go through the search query report, and help us figure out if there is anything to negate. Now, what are those different performance buckets then? Those different rules that we have under our strategy? We can have, for example, a rule that checks the performance from the last 90 days, 30 days, whatever that might be, and highlights any queries if there are no conversions and they have a high cost. Then we can have a second rule that analyzes anything that didn't really match that first rule that we had and checks if any queries have a low CTR and maybe low return on ad spend, and then flags those. Now, like I said, every rule has at least one condition, but there can be multiple conditions as well. So for example, we can say, hey, if this search query has not converted, all conversions are equal to 0, and it has already spent more than the typical cost per conversion in that campaign, then we'll consider it as a non-high cost search query and possibly want to negate that. And then what the actions can be, it can be a report, no action item per se, just a report that flags these search queries. We can have an option to add these queries as negatives, for example, at the ad group level, or maybe in a shared negative list as well. Those actions also depend, of course, on what we're analyzing here. For keywords, we will have a different set of possible actions for campaigns and so forth. And then the nice thing here is that you can automate these strategies to run for you on a daily, weekly, monthly, bi-monthly basis, and send you a notification if there's something to review, or a notification to the right team member in your team, of course. All right, but that was the introduction to Rule Engine and how it works at the high level. Now let's have a look at concrete examples. All right, so our first topic is multiple date ranges. Now, the problem statement is, I need to catch sudden drops in performance before they cost too much. So we do want to make sure that if there are drops in performance or spikes in spend, those things would get flagged. In this example, we'll want to get a notification and maybe label ads when performance starts declining. We'll want to make sure that if performance drops month over month or last 30 days compared to the previous 30 days, that will trigger an alert. What you can do in Google Ads, you can, and let me just jump over to the Google Ads interface here. You can create a rule for ads, right? Let's call this low CTR rule. Now, our action could be to pause these ads or change labels. Perfect. That's exactly what we want to do, but only if performance is declining. Now, for you to be able to catch when performance is declining, there's a need for multiple date ranges. Obviously, we need a comparison date range. In the rules, you can only use one date range at a time. So we can't say, hey, compare the previous 30 days to the most recent 30 days. The nice thing here in Rule Engine is that you can. First, I'll just quickly mention that in the upper right-hand corner, you have the Add Strategy button. Here you'll find your library of rules, your pre-built strategies, and you also can build your own optimization alert sequences or copy from another account if you're already using Rule Engine on another account. In the pre-built strategy section, we could go to the monitoring and alert section. And there we will find something called add copies with a decline in CTR. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the conditions and the Rule Engine editor here to see how Optmyzr can solve this problem. So we only have one rule in our strategy, and that rule has 5 different conditions and 2 different actions. Rule conditions are that ad needs to be enabled, it needs to have a CTR drop. We're comparing the most recent 30 days to the 30 days prior to these most recent 30 days. There needs to be some CTR from the preceding 30 days. And during both date ranges, we want to make sure that there are some impressions. If all of this is true, then a label will be applied and a report will be generated. And let's have a look at how you can use these custom date ranges and these comparison date ranges in your rules. So you can go ahead and edit an existing condition or add another condition, select value, and there head over to the date range dropdown. There you'll find something called add a custom date range. So what we can say here, for example, let's say we wanted to add a layer that checks if cost has increased in the most recent 7 days compared to the previous 7 days. We can easily use this kind of date range also together with our rule, even though most of our conditions use different date range. So let's just add a date range that we'll call previous 7 days. And we'll want to define when that date range starts and when it ends. So in other words, in our case, we would want the start date to be 14 days ago and that end date to be 8 days ago. That translates to 7 days. Save that, and now that previous 7 days is available for us to use in our date range selector. And we can say, for example, if cost in the previous 7 days was less than the cost in our most recent 7 days, then we want the action to happen. Once we're happy with our rule, with our conditions, then we'll just go ahead and view the suggestions. In this case, any ad that saw a significant decline will get flagged here. If we apply these suggestions, they will get labeled. And if we automate this strategy, we'll be able to get these reports on a weekly, monthly, daily basis. All right, let's jump over to our next topic, which is adapting targets to each campaign. Okay, so in this example, what we want to do is review negative keyword ideas. Now, static targets, static values like $50 or 50 euros are not necessarily the most scalable way to build automations. What we actually want to do is compare a search query's performance to that of the triggered keywords or the ad groups or even the campaign typical, for these strategies to be scalable from one account to the other and from one campaign to the other as well. In Google Ads, it's not possible to automate the search query analysis and combine that with the option to add negative keywords after a review. You are able to obviously use scripts for this. You can use the search term report, but using the automated rules to flag suggestions is not possible as of today. I'll jump over to Optmyzr right away and show you how you can automate or semi-automate your search query analysis and negative keyword ideas. Okay, we're back to our editor, and in this case, we're actually using an adaptation of a pre-built strategy. You'll find it under automated bidding and non-converting queries for search, as well as rule engine and view and create strategies there under add strategy. This is an adaptation because the original strategies have a few extra conditions, a few extra rules. We wanted to keep this fairly simple today. So what we're saying is, if there are any search queries that in the last 90 days have not converted at all, they're not exact matches to the keyword that they triggered, and they have already spent at least 1.5 times that typical cost per conversion in the ad group. And if that is true, then that action would take place. If that's not true, if there are queries that don't match this set of criteria, then they will be analyzed by the else rule, no conversions in the last 30 days, but have converted in the last 90 days. So they stopped converting. And there is also that cost increase. And if that's true, our action would take place. You might have noticed that in both cases, we just generate a report. So we might want to change that to have the option to add the keyword as a negative keyword at the ad group level, for instance, let's say in an exact match type. The nice thing here is that you can do these relative comparisons, right? Something that is not possible in Google Ads. In Google Ads, you cannot say, hey, I want to compare my search queries cost to the triggered keywords or the triggered ad groups cost. In Optmyzr, you can. So let's see how that works. So you have different scopes. For example, here the scope is search term. And we're saying if cost is greater than, and here we're actually using an expression. So we're not only comparing that search term's cost to the ad group's cost per conversion, but we're actually multiplying that by 1.5. And that's how we can get our 50% increase check there in our rule. This way, the strategy is also scalable from one account and one campaign to another. We'll get back to that just in a bit. Let's move on to our third point, baking in smart layers. Search query analysis can easily be one of the biggest time drains there is. And one of the reasons is that most queries are just small variations of the actual keyword. In Optmyzr, you can bake in something called similarity percent and other attributes. So let's jump back to rule engine. Now, to avoid a situation where we're getting bombarded with suggestions that are very close to the actual targeted keyword already, we can add a condition that checks if the similarity percent is greater than a threshold. Let's select that and let's say, hey, if the similarity is less than 40%, only then I want this search term to be flagged for me. And only then we could consider adding it as a new targeted keyword. The next point is very important, how to automate, how to make sure that, machine does the heavy lifting on your behalf without actually losing control. The problem statement is, I want automation to save me some time, but I can't risk bad changes going live without a review. In Google Ads, you can run rules automatically. You can get an email. You don't need to have an action item necessarily, but then, combining those two is not possible, or it's very tedious. In Optmyzr, you can run these strategies on demand. You can preview them, you can automate them, and keep yourself in the process. So let's have a look at how. In Google Ads, you would have to be more reactive than proactive. You would get an email when there are some changes. You can go and review those changes. You can revert them. But is that the best use of your time? Not necessarily. Let's now have a look at how the same thing would work in Optmyzr. Like in Google Ads, you can run these strategies on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, a few times a week, however often you want, and decide when these rules actually run. But you don't need to necessarily apply these changes. You can just get a notification, add your email here, add your team members' emails here, and every time the rule runs and finds some results, you will get an email, you will get a link to this report that we're looking at here. You can review the changes, preview them, and then decide which keywords in this case you would like to pause. Now, there are other options as well. You can, for example, add these results to your alerts page, have a centralized alerts page for native as well as your custom alerts in the monitoring section of Optmyzr. You can absolutely run this on full automation as well, especially if you've run it a few times and you know that it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. You can obviously have it apply changes on your behalf. You can export these results to a spreadsheet automatically every time it runs, if it's easier to analyze suggestions like that, or maybe include them in your reporting or other workflows. Okay, so we've had a few search specific examples. Let's have an e-commerce example and see how you can use Rule Engine to prioritize and rank your products. So let's say you have a set of top products, your best sellers, and you want to make sure that you get a notification if any of those best sellers start declining in performance. You want to get an alert. You want to be able to quickly make sense without having too much noise and without needing to go through product reports. And in this case, Google Ads really cannot help you much. You might have a script. In Optmyzr, you can use ranks within your rules. Now let's go ahead and jump over to Optmyzr to see how that would work. Let's jump over to the shopping and PMax products and create something from scratch. So let's say this product in the previous 30 days in terms of conversions was in the top, let's say 10% of products. And now in the most recent 30 days, so let's add another condition here and use the last 30 days. Let's select conversions again. And now conversions are in the bottom, let's say 60% of products. Actually, I should say that the products are within the bottom 60% in terms of conversions. They went from top 10% in terms of conversions to the bottom 60%. This is something that we'd want to automate as a custom alert. Let's move on and talk about linking data that does not live in the Google Ads interface. The example here is adjusting targets on specific days to basically increase conversion volume on high shopping days like Black Friday, maybe days leading to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and so forth. And in Google Ads, while it is possible to set rules to run on a specific day and take action, for example, enable a campaign, pause a campaign, those would require multiple different rules and the setup would be very tedious. And in addition, it's not possible to tweak targets based on performance with Google Ads automated rules. In Optmyzr, you can handle this with external data. I'll give an example just in a second, but you can also use our pre-built rules to adjust targets. You don't need external data necessarily for this. So let's have a look. So in Rule Engine, you're able to use Google Sheets as a data source, as an additional data source, and layer this data with your other performance metrics, for example, that come through the Google Ads API. In this case, we have a list of holidays coming up and a list of campaigns. And essentially, we're just checking, is today one of those holidays that we have in our shopping dates? What's our current target ROAS and what that holiday target ROAS should then be? And you can find the option to add external data in the settings section of your Rule Engine editor, external data. You can download your sample data from here. This way you'll, for example, get your campaign IDs without needing to copy paste those from Google Ads. And when you link that spreadsheet, you'll have all these different columns from the spreadsheet available for use. And now, in this example, what we're saying is, if today is holiday and that campaign is enabled, then we want to set the target to be our holiday target ROAS. Very simple. Let's also add a label so it's easy to identify those later on. Then when this rule runs over and over and over again, it checks if today is still a holiday. If today is not a holiday and that campaign is enabled, and let's say it has that label, this is the same label than right here, then let's revert those changes and set the target ROAS back to where it was. Very simple and takes care of both sides of that strategy. This is by no means the only way of using external data. So you can also link a list, a spreadsheet that includes a list, maybe your competitor terms or maybe your branded queries that you want to include in your rules, or maybe something else that does not live in Google Ads, but you still want to use within your automated Rule Engine rules. Let's then talk a little bit about preventing overcorrection. Obviously, we don't want to be making changes every single day. That's not a strategic way. That is not a smart way. Google's algorithm might get upset for frequent changes, but we still want to keep our rules running every day and checking if there's an opportunity to make changes, adjust targets, adjust budgets, etc. How you do this in Google Ads? Well, you don't. There's no way to say, hey, if a campaign was changed in the last 7 days, then exclude it from these changes. Google Ads can keep making changes to the same campaigns, to the same budgets, day after day, even if changes were applied just yesterday. In Optmyzr, you can prevent this kind of scenario from happening and still have your rules running every day, checking for opportunities. Now, how you do this in practice, let me jump over to Rule Engine and let's go ahead and add a strategy. Let's use a budget example here and exclude, let's use the last 14 days, or let's use this as 7 days. Now, any campaign and any budget that was changed within the last 7 days will not be changed before that cooldown window is over. That still keeps the rule running and checking if there's an opportunity to tweak things in other budgets. So this is basically there to help you make sure that overcorrection doesn't happen, whether you're running rules on full automation or semi-automation or just on demand. Moving on to our last topic today, scaling these rules across your different accounts. So the problem statement is that I want to reuse the rules that I've created. Static thresholds are not really scalable. I have accounts under my portfolio that run on different currencies. Different clients have different targets, and I still want to use a rule that can be scaled from one client to another. So in Google Ads, you are able to build rules that run at the MCC level. However, all of those accounts need to have the same currency. And there are other restrictions as well, as we've discussed. So these rules might not be very scalable by nature. In Optmyzr, let's have a look at how we solve this. So we've already discussed how it's not necessary to build in static absolute values like CPAs greater than 20. You can use relative checks. And if you use those relative checks, those should be then applicable across different clients. Now, you can use rules at the account level, but you can also make your strategies global. What that means is that any strategy that has that globe icon there is available across any account that you have linked to Optmyzr, any Google Ads account. You can take your global strategies and run them on all or selected accounts. All right, so that was our Learn with Optmyzr today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you want to learn more about how to set up those relative checks, if you want to learn more about using external data in your rules, bounce ideas on what kind of routine tasks it would make sense to fully automate or automate partially, let us know, right, to support@optmyzr.com or leave us a comment, and we will be more than happy to brainstorm with you and help you get started. Thanks so much and take care. Bye.